Man, that's so interesting and powerful what you just said. It's like traveling traveling while indigenous, TWI, and there's like memory. There's a kind of like memory that's activated, I think, in those traveling those routes, those routes that our people traveled 100,000 years ago. Um, Giving an offering at a place that people have been giving offerings at for thousands of years, right? There's something really profound, I think, about the chain, almost like the chain of relationships that are formed through traveling and making kinship with people, whether it's political or in other types of ways, and that's there's something really foundational, I think, about those relationships in terms of like this world, the next world, the alternative, right? That we're trying to build, as you say, once imperialism and capitalism are gone, because they will be gone. I mean, we're in the throes of some really terrible, kind of like death throes, and just like the resurgence of certain kinds of violent protections, of the interests of imperialists and the ruling class. I mean, of course, that's happening right now, but the reason why they're so scared of losing is because they're losing, and that things are changing in the world. I think there's some sort of epic shift happening, and so those things will change, and certain iterations of them will come to an end. And I think the job of like revolutionaries is not only to like help people imagine the alternative, this world that we're emerging into, but to build that goddamn world. You can't just imagine something into existence. That's just liberalism. Like that's stupid. Like Marx was like, people who write in the Enlightenment tradition, all they do is like imagine abstract concepts, and it's not materialist. And I'm like, I agree with you, Marx. And so, as a revolutionary, you're a materialist, and so you want to build the alternative. You don't want to just imagine it or dream it or whatever. And I think there's something really important about traveling, especially for indigenous revolutionaries, right? In the actual act of traveling itself is part of like the building the foundation for this alternative and this new world that we're emerging into, which is part of the reason why the Red Nation has been really active in international solidarity work, whether it's from Palestine to Bolivia to Brazil to I went up to Dene territory in the so-called Northwest Territories about 3 years ago on a Red Nation delegation. Of course, Dene, and Dene are related in some significant ways, but that was like one of the most profound traveling like experiences I had ever had. There was something very deeply like I don't know, like lasting. Even if you only do it once, and you don't talk to those people for a decade, something sticks sometimes in those traveling experiences. And the thing that sticks is like unshakable, And I think this is especially true between like indigenous people when we travel to meet each other and come into those relationships with each other. But I have also found this to be true traveling to meet with other revolutionaries, like socialists who took me around Belfast, like or Palestinians, right? Going to the West Bank and those things like they change you profoundly, but then also, like I said, they provide the cumulative foundation upon which I think to build this next world. And so Elena and I were talking a lot about like what would tourism look like, in like a socialist environment, or even like I don't know, what would tourism look like in like this future, this future that I'm kind of projecting, that like let's say a post-capitalist and a post-imperialist future. We can dream. We can dream and imagine. And I've been wanting to go to Cuba actually to see what I mean. That's not like entirely a good example, just because Cuba faces extreme sanctions and is constantly being barraged by the US imperialist machine that just wants to destroy it completely, the socialist project in Cuba. But Cuba, like a very significant portion of Cuba's economy is based on tourism, which has really suffered because of COVID, right? Because there's been so many travel restrictions. But I've just been interested in like going places to kind of see what socialists are like communist experiments or indigenous experiments with tourism that aren't about this weird cannibalism that you're talking about, like the eco and cultural tourism that is still replicating a certain type of like luxury tourism model that caters to settler, like global north settler interests and tastes, which I think is primarily what tourism in Indian country in the United States primarily caters to. And so just kind of trying to go to places as a tourist and as a visitor and as a guest and experience like what that is like in those places to try to get an idea of what tourism and travel would look like, you know, in an alternative kind of economy that doesn't, you know, that isn't so over determined by capitalism and imperialism. And I haven't quite wrapped my head around it because I haven't done that traveling yet. Really, I've barely traveled since COVID hit. Like I've just been at home, honestly, which I think everyone should be doing. But yeah, this is just these are the things. These are the things I think of, and also like not being like shamey to our communities and our nations that, or to nations like Cuba or other nations that depend very significantly on tourism for any type of income, right? To be able to provide social services and goods that states usually do, states and nations. And so at the same time, really pushing back against the relationships of like exploitation and dependency that they create. And that those economies are very much dependent still upon, right? Like catering to settler tastes and participating in a really, like you said, like icky type of capitalism and consumerism and racism, right? That like we don't really want to be doing if we're going to be trying to do some sort of like, you know, alternative economic development that would be like anti-capitalist or a capitalist or post-capitalist. So